As Israel targeted schools, mosques, hospitals, ambulances, UN sanctuaries, as it flattened entire civilian neighborhoods, as it slaughtered and incinerated Gaza's defenseless civilian population, Israeli commentators gloated. They said, Gaza, now I'm quoting one, Gaza is to Lebanon as the second sitting for an exam is to the first, a second chance to get it right. And that this time around, Israel had hurled Gaza back not a mere 20 years, as in Lebanon, but 60 years. Hurled Gaza back into the 1940s. Electricity is available only for a few hours a day. A second Israeli commentator said, Israel regained its deterrence capabilities because the war in Gaza has compensated for the shortcomings of the 2006 Lebanon war. Notice there's not even a pretense that this had anything whatever to do with the rocket attacks. They had everything to do with the defeat it suffered in Lebanon and the need to restore their deterrence capacity, the Arab world's fear of them. A third said, there is no doubt that Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is upset these days. There will no longer be anyone in the Arab world who can claim that Israel is weak. And it's true. Who can now claim that Israel is weak? Who can doubt that it is strong and courageous, heroic and brave? It caged in behind barbed wire fences and concrete walls, a teeming refugee population. About 80% of Gaza consists of refugees and their descendants. Half of the Gazans are under 16 years of age. It deprived this captive population of food, medicine, and other basic necessities, reducing it to abject despair. It then sent in its jet planes, helicopter gunships, its tanks, and its armored personnel carriers. It sprayed entire civilian neighborhoods with white phosphorus. It then proceeded to slaughter and incinerate the defenseless population. Who can now claim that Israel is weak? One American who was very thrilled by what happened in Gaza was Thomas Friedman, the New York Times' expert commentator on the Middle East and elsewhere. Friedman always likes to tell you that he knows it better. Everyone thinks the world is round, no, the world is flat. And now Mr. Friedman says the whole world got it wrong in the Lebanon war as well. He said Israel didn't lose in 2006. He said Israel won the Lebanon war. Why did it win? How did it win? He said, well, Israel inflicted substantial property damage and collateral casualties on Lebanon at large, thereby administering an education to Hezbollah. It educated them. How did it educate them? It targeted civilian infrastructure, targeted civilians, inflicted heavy damage, and now he says Hezbollah will, quote, think 3 times next time before defying Israel. Now, most of you are, nearly all of you, are law students, and you know that the dictionary definition is terrorism is the targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure to achieve a political goal. Well, Mr. Friedman has coined a new term. He calls it education. The Lebanese were educated, don't mess with Israel, or we will terrorize you into submission. And Mr. Friedman thinks this is a good thing. It was such a good thing, he said, that he hoped that Israel was doing the same thing in Gaza. He said he was hoping they were, quote, trying to educate Hamas by inflicting a heavy death toll on Hamas militants and heavy pain on the Gaza population. Heavy pain on the Gaza population. That's how you educate Arabs. No Arab country left behind. The way you educate them is by inflicting heavy pain on them so they understand, don't mess with Israel. Of course, Mr. Friedman has to find some justification for counseling the recourse, the resort to terrorism, and his rationalization, his justification is the one most of you are familiar with. He said Israel had no choice. You know, those nasty Islamic fundamentalists, those demonic, satanic Hezbollah people, they're cowards. They hide amongst the population, as he puts it. They were embedded in, nested among, intertwined with the Lebanese civilian population. And what's poor Israel to do? It has to kill civilians because that's the only way it can defeat the Hezbollah. It doesn't want to, its soul is anguish, it's pain, it cries as it murders, but it has no choice. And I suspect most of you are, to some extent, convinced by that argument. But then we have to look at what the record shows. In fact, there's a large amount now of material available on what happened during that war. So let's take the case of Human Rights Watch, which is hardly a radical organization when it comes to the Middle East. In fact, it's quite conservative. They did an exhaustive study of the 2006 war. This is what they found. Quote, "We found strong evidence that Hezbollah stored most of its rockets in bunkers and weapon storage facilities located in uninhabited fields and valleys. We found that in the vast majority of cases, Hezbollah fighters left populated civilian areas as soon as the fighting started. We found that the Hezbollah fired the vast majority of its rockets from positions outside villages. We found that in all but a few of the cases of civilian deaths we investigated, Hezbollah fighters had not mixed with the civilian population." All right, some of you are thinking Human Rights Watch, you know, liberal organization, just look at its title, it believes in human rights. So let's take a study by an organization which we can all agree does not believe in human rights. A U.S. Army War College study was published a couple of months ago. Bear in mind, the study was done based almost entirely on Israeli participants in the Lebanon War. The Hezbollah refused to be interviewed for the study, so their conclusions are based on what the Israeli fighters told them. What did they find? Quote, "The key battlefields in the land campaign south of the Litani River were mostly devoid of civilians. IDF, Israel Defense Forces, the Israeli Army, IDF participants consistently report little or no meaningful intermingling of Hezbollah fighters and non-combatants." But it gets even worse. "Nor is there any systematic reporting of Hezbollah using civilians in the combat zones as shields." It's just all made up. It's all fantasy. Israel did not target civilian infrastructure and civilians in Lebanon in 2006 because it had no choice. It had every choice. The Hezbollah fighters were not intermingled with the civilians and the civilian infrastructure. It targeted the civilians and civilian infrastructure because terrorizing the civilian population was a relatively cost-free method of education, of restoring deterrence capacity, much to be preferred over fighting a real foe and suffering heavy casualties.